The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber pulsed with an eerie blue light as 12 different alien species gathered for an emergency session. Ambassador Vexthara of the Crystalline Hegemony stood at the center podium, her translucent form shimmering with agitation as she addressed the assembled delegates. "Fellow council members, we face an unprecedented situation," Vexthara began, her voice carrying the musical tones typical of her species. "3 separate raids on colony. Worlds have been repelled by forces belonging to a species that calls itself human. These humans appeared from nowhere and somehow defeated our most experienced raiders using tactics that make no sense according to established military doctrine." Council Chair Quindle, a towering figure with scales that shifted from green to purple depending on his mood, leaned forward in his ornate seat. His massive form dominated the chamber as he spoke with the authority of someone who had ruled the council for over 2 centuries. "Explain these tactics, Ambassador Vexthara. What could primitive beings possibly do that would concern the council?" Vexthara activated a holographic display showing footage from the failed raids. The images revealed human defenders using their environment in ways that seemed impossible to the watching aliens. Humans had turned their own cities into deadly mazes, used civilian vehicles as weapons, and coordinated attacks with a precision that suggested military training among their entire population. In the first raid on Colony 7, our forces expected standard defensive patterns. Instead, the humans evacuated their population centers and then used hidden explosives to collapse entire city blocks on our advancing troops. They fought from positions that offered no tactical advantage according to our understanding, yet somehow inflicted massive casualties. The council members shifted uneasily as the footage continued. Ambassador Cretan of the Void Stalkers, known for his military prowess, spoke up with obvious disdain. "This appears to be nothing more than desperate animals fighting for survival. Any species will become dangerous when cornered. I fail to see why this requires council attention." "That was our initial assessment," Vexthara replied, her form flickering with nervous energy. "However, the second and third raids revealed something far more troubling. The humans learned from each encounter and adapted their tactics. By the third raid, they had developed countermeasures for our standard assault patterns that we had never seen before." The holographic display shifted to show human fighters using improvised weapons that seemed to defy logic, yet proved devastatingly effective. Humans had somehow turned common industrial equipment into weapons capable of penetrating advanced armor. They coordinated their attacks using communication methods that bypassed standard jamming techniques. "Most disturbing of all," Vexthara continued, "is that these humans accomplish this with technology that is centuries behind our own. Their ships are crude, their weapons are primitive, and their total population is barely a fraction of any council member species. Yet they defeated forces that have conquered dozens of worlds." Council Chair Quindle's scales shifted to a deep purple, indicating his growing concern. The other council members began murmuring among themselves in various alien languages, their voices creating a cacophony of worry and confusion. "What do we know about their home system?" asked Ambassador Zektar of the Silicon Collective, her mechanical voice cutting through the noise. "Their planet is called Earth, located in a previously unexplored sector designated as Sol 3. Intelligence reports suggest they achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, making them one of the newest spacefaring species in the galaxy. Their colonial expansion has been limited to 12 worlds, all within a relatively small area of space." The numbers seemed to calm the council members slightly. 12 worlds was nothing compared to the thousands controlled by even the smallest council member species. However, Vexthara's next words brought their anxiety rushing back. "Despite their limited expansion, every human colony has proven to be a fortress. Our raiding parties were not random attacks, but carefully planned operations designed to test their defenses. In each case, the humans demonstrated tactical innovation that surpassed our expectations." Meanwhile, millions of miles away in the Sol system, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, reading the communication that had just arrived from Earth Command. The message was brief but clear. represent humanity at the Galactic Council's emergency session. Regarding recent colonial conflicts, Morrison was a 34-year-old former Marine who had transitioned to Starship Command after distinguished service in the Colonial Defense Corps. His weathered face bore the scars of someone who had seen real combat, and his calm demeanor under pressure had earned him respect throughout the human fleet. "Tactical Officer Grant, what's our current status?" Morrison asked, turning to the young woman at the weapons console. Lisa Grant looked up from her displays, her dark hair pulled back in the regulation military style. "All systems operational, Captain. The ship is ready for immediate departure. If needed, engineering, how are our stealth systems?" Morrison called out to the lower deck. Pete Sullivan, the ship's chief engineer, glanced up from his control panel. "Running at optimal efficiency, sir. We could disappear from sensors for weeks if necessary." Morrison nodded, satisfied with his crew's readiness. The Defiant was one of humanity's newer destroyers, built with the hard-learned lessons of colonial defense in mind. While it appeared unremarkable compared to the massive ships other species favored, it contained innovations that had proven their worth in recent conflicts. "Sir, are we really going to this council meeting?" Grant asked, unable to hide her concern. "From what I've heard, they don't exactly welcome new species with open arms." "That's exactly why we're going," Morrison replied. "Earth Command wants to establish diplomatic relations before someone decides to make us a target. Better to talk than fight, at least initially." Sullivan shook his head as he continued working on his console. "I still think it's a trap." "Why? Would they suddenly want to meet with us after ignoring us for 50 years? "Because we stopped being ignorable," Morrison said simply. "When you defend yourself successfully, people notice. The question is whether they notice us as potential allies or potential threats." The communication from Earth Command had included classified intelligence about the Galactic Council's military capabilities. The numbers were staggering: thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and technology that humanity was still decades away from matching. Yet somehow, human colonial forces had defeated their raiders 3 times in a row. "Captain," Grant said, studying her tactical display, "I've been analyzing the reports from the colonial defenses. Our people didn't just get lucky. They used tactics that would never work against human forces but were perfectly suited to alien military doctrine." Morrison moved to look at her analysis, noting the patterns she had identified. "You're suggesting our tactical thinking is fundamentally different from theirs?" "Exactly. They seem to favor direct confrontation with superior technology. Our people used environmental advantages, psychological warfare, and unconventional weapons. It's like they were fighting an entirely different type of war." The implications were significant. If human military thinking was truly different from established galactic norms, it might explain their recent successes. It also suggested that humanity's true strength lay not in their technology, but in their approach to conflict. "Set course for the Council Station," Morrison ordered, "and send a message to Admiral Brooks. Tell her to maintain position with the fleet, but stay ready for immediate action." As the Defiant prepared to depart for humanity's first official contact with the Galactic Council, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would determine far more than just diplomatic relations. The Council's sudden interest in humanity suggested they were either very impressed or very concerned about human capabilities. Either way, Morrison intended to ensure that humanity's first impression would be one they would never forget. The Council space station hung in the void like a metallic flower with 12 massive petals extending from its central hub. Each petal represented one of the founding species of the Galactic Council, their architectural styles blending into a structure that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The station measured over 50 kilometers in diameter and housed millions of beings from across the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the UES Defiant as they approached the docking bay assigned to the human delegation. The sight before him was both magnificent and intimidating. Warships from dozens of species surrounded the station, their hulls gleaming with exotic materials and weapon systems that seemed to bend light itself. "Captain, their docking control?" Is requesting our ship specifications, reported Communications Officer Danny Ross from his station. Give them the standard information, Morrison replied, not taking his eyes off the alien vessels. Hull length, crew complement, and basic systems only. The Defiant was a sleek destroyer measuring 300 meters from bow to stern, tiny, compared to the kilometer-long behemoths that served as escorts for the council members. Its dark gray hull was designed for stealth rather than intimidation, with smooth curves that deflected sensor scans rather than the angular aggressive designs favored by most alien species. Sir, they're assigning us Docking Bay 700. And 12, Ross announced. It's in the lower maintenance section. Morrison smiled grimly at the obvious insult. The council was making it clear that humanity ranked somewhere below visiting merchants in their hierarchy. The maintenance section was typically reserved for cargo vessels and minor diplomatic missions from species that barely registered on the galactic political scale, acknowledged. Take us in nice and steady. As the Defiant settled into the designated docking bay, Morrison could see alien observers watching from elevated platforms. Their various forms created a bizarre assembly of scales, tentacles, metallic surfaces, and energy fields that represented the diversity of council membership. Most seemed curious about the newcomers, but their body language suggested the same casual interest one might show to an unusual but harmless animal. Captain, the docking bay is not equipped with standard atmospheric controls, reported Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan. We'll need to use our environmental suits for the entire visit. This was another deliberate slight. The council routinely provided atmospheric accommodation for diplomatic visits, but apparently humanity did not warrant such consideration. Morrison had expected this treatment and came prepared. No problem. Have the diplomatic team suit up and meet me at the airlock in 10 minutes. The human delegation consisted of 3 people, Captain Morrison as the military representative, Ambassador Amy Carter as the civilian diplomat, and Colonel Rick Hayes as the security escort. Carter was a career diplomat in her 40s with extensive experience in first contact protocols, while Hayes was a Marine colonel whose calm demeanor concealed years of combat experience. Captain, I have to say this reception is not exactly welcoming, Carter observed as she checked her environmental suit systems. That's the point, Morrison replied. They want us to feel small and insignificant before we even enter the chamber. Standard intimidation tactics. Colonel Hayes finished his equipment check and looked up with a slight grin. Good thing we don't intimidate easily. The airlock cycled open to reveal a waiting party of alien escorts. The lead figure was a tall humanoid with blue-tinted skin and 4 arms, wearing what appeared to be ceremonial robes. Behind him stood 2 guards whose species Morrison did not recognize, their forms hidden beneath powered armor that hummed with energy. I am Protocol. Officer Ventar, the blue-skinned alien announced in accented but clear English. I will escort you to the council chambers. Please follow standard diplomatic procedures and speak only when addressed directly by council members. The journey through the station's corridors took nearly an hour, a deliberate demonstration of the structure's immense size. The walls were covered with holographic displays showing the territories controlled by various council species, each image emphasizing the vast scope of their civilizations. Billions of beings lived under council protection across thousands of worlds, while humanity's 12 colonies barely registered as a footnote. Impressive, Carter murmured quietly to Morrison as they passed a display showing the crystalline hegemony's 347 worlds. Size isn't everything, Morrison replied equally quietly, drawing a sharp look from their escort. The council chambers were even more magnificent than the station's exterior had suggested. The central area was a vast amphitheater with seating for thousands of observers, while the council members themselves occupied elevated platforms that allowed them to look down upon anyone addressing the assembly. The architecture was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant as the human delegation entered the chamber. Conversation among the alien observers gradually died down. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on the 3 humans walking across the polished floor. Morrison kept his pace steady and his expression neutral. Aware that every gesture was being analyzed and interpreted, Council Chair Quindle dominated the central platform, his massive scaled form radiating authority. The other 11 council members occupied their species-specific seating, each platform designed to accommodate their unique physical requirements. Some floated in energy fields, others rested on crystalline structures, and a few seemed to exist as patterns of light, rather than solid matter. "Approach the speaking platform," Quindle commanded, his deep voice echoing through the chamber without need for amplification. Morrison led his team to the designated area, a small circular platform in the center of the chamber. The positioning forced them to turn constantly to address different council members, another psychological tactic designed to create discomfort and confusion. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Forces," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I am here to represent humanity in response to your invitation." "Tell us about your military capabilities," interrupted Ambassador Cretan of the Void Stalkers, his insectoid form clicking with what might have been amusement. "We have heard interesting reports about your recent defensive actions." Morrison had prepared for this question. "Humanity currently maintains a fleet of 237 vessels across 12 colony systems. Our technology is based on fusion power, kinetic weapons, and defensive systems designed for our specific operational requirements." The numbers drew murmurs from the assembled aliens. 237 ships was laughably small compared to the thousands maintained by even minor council species. Several council members exchanged what appeared to be amused glances, their various forms of communication creating a subtle buzz of condescension. "And your population?" asked Ambassador Vextara, her crystalline form pulsing with curiosity. "Approximately 15 billion humans across all colonies and Earth itself," Carter answered from her position beside Morrison. This number generated outright laughter from some of the alien observers. 15 billion was less than the population of most individual council member worlds. The humans were clearly a minor species that had somehow stumbled into galactic attention through sheer luck. "Very interesting," Quindle rumbled, his scales shifting to a lighter shade that indicated amusement. "Such a small force, yet you have managed to repel 3 separate raids. Perhaps you could explain how this was accomplished?" Morrison glanced at his companions before answering. "Our defensive success came from understanding our enemies and using appropriate tactics for each situation. We believe in fighting smart rather than fighting hard." "Fighting smart?" repeated Ambassador Cretan with obvious mockery. "How quaint, and what exactly does this smart fighting involve?" "Using every available advantage, adapting to changing circumstances, and never underestimating the determination of beings fighting for their homes," Morrison replied evenly. The response drew more murmurs from the council members, though the tone seemed less amused than before. Morrison's calm confidence in the face of their obvious technological and numerical superiority was unexpected. Most species in humanity's position would be begging for protection or making desperate offers of tribute. "We shall consider your words," Quindle announced after a moment of silence. "However, the Council has a proposal for humanity that we believe will benefit both our civilizations." Morrison waited silently, knowing that whatever came next would determine humanity's future relationship with the galaxy's dominant power structure. The silence in the council chambers stretched for several long moments as chair. Quindle prepared to deliver what Morrison suspected would be an ultimatum disguised as a generous offer. The alien leader's massive form shifted on his platform, scales rippling from purple back to their natural green as he composed his thoughts. "Humanity faces a dangerous galaxy," Quindle began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of authority. "Your recent encounters with raiders represent only the smallest fraction of the threats that exist beyond your limited territory. Pirates, slavers, and conquest fleets roam the outer sectors, seeking vulnerable targets." Morrison maintained his neutral expression while internally noting the careful phrasing. The council chair was building a case for why humanity needed protection, setting up justification for whatever demands would follow. The Galactic Council has maintained peace and order for over 3,000 years, Quindle continued. We have created a system where civilized species can thrive under our guidance and protection. Trade flows freely between member worlds. Disputes are resolved through diplomatic channels, and military threats are handled by our combined fleets. Ambassador Vexthara's crystalline form pulsed with supportive energy as she added, member species contribute to the common good according to their abilities. In return, they receive the full protection of Council military forces and access to our advanced technologies. The setup was becoming clear to Morrison. The Council was about to offer humanity membership, but membership that would come with strings attached. He glanced at Amy Carter, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod indicating she was reaching the same conclusion. However, Quindle's voice took on a more serious tone, not all species are ready for full membership in our community. Some require a period of guidance and development before they can contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. Ambassador Cretan leaned forward on his platform, his insectoid features clicking with what Morrison was beginning to recognize as barely concealed contempt. The Void Stalkers have extensive experience with species integration. We have observed that younger civilizations often benefit from protective oversight until they mature sufficiently to handle galactic responsibilities. Protective oversight, Morrison repeated slowly. Could you elaborate on what that would involve? Certainly, Quindle replied, clearly pleased that the humans were asking the right questions. Humanity would be granted protectorate status. Under the crystalline hegemony's administrative umbrella, this would provide immediate security for all human colonies and guarantee safe passage for your merchant vessels. Vexthara's form brightened as she took over the explanation. Our protection would include regular patrol fleets in human space, advanced warning systems for potential threats, and access to Council medical and educational resources. Your species would benefit enormously from such arrangements. And in return? Carter asked, her diplomatic training helping her maintain a professional tone despite the obvious direction of the conversation. Very reasonable contributions, Quindle assured them. Each human colony would provide 20% of their annual production to support the protection fleet. Additionally, human military forces would be integrated into Council command structures to ensure proper coordination. Morrison felt Colonel Hayes tense beside him. The Marines' combat experience was telling him the same thing. Morrison's was recognizing this was surrender disguised as partnership. 20% tribute was substantial, but the military integration clause was the real trap. What about human governmental autonomy? Carter pressed, doing her job as a diplomat by exploring the proposal's implications. Local governance would remain largely unchanged, Vexthara replied smoothly. However, major military and economic decisions would require Council approval to ensure they align with galactic stability requirements. The chamber fell silent as the human delegation absorbed the full scope of what was being offered. Protectorate status would effectively make humanity a client state, paying tribute and surrendering military independence in exchange for protection they had not requested. Ambassador Kriegnes' patience finally ran out. Let me speak more directly since you seem to have difficulty understanding the generosity of this offer. Your species has been fortunate in its recent encounters, but luck does not last forever. The raiders you defeated were poorly organized. Scavengers, not serious military threats. His insectoid form shifted to a more aggressive posture as he continued. Real conquest fleets would crush your pathetic defenses without effort. Your 200 ships would not survive contact with a single Council member's patrol squadron. Your colonies would be enslaved or destroyed, and your homeworld would become a footnote in galactic history. The brutally honest assessment sent ripples of agreement through the assembled Council members. Several alien observers in the galleries began what Morrison assumed were expressions of approval in their various species' body language. The Council's offer of protection is not a request, Cretan continued, his voice rising with authority. It is a necessity for your survival. Accept protectorate status gracefully, or face the consequences of isolation in a hostile galaxy. Morrison felt the weight of the moment. This was clearly meant to be the point where humanity gratefully accepted the Council's generous offer and submitted to their authority. The entire presentation had been designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance and the wisdom of cooperation. "I appreciate the Council's concern for human welfare," Morrison replied carefully. "However, this is obviously a decision that requires consultation with our government. I would like to request a recess to communicate with Earth Command." Quindle's scales darkened slightly, indicating his displeasure with the delay. "Very well, you have 1 standard hour to reach your decision. Use this time wisely." The council members began filing out of the chamber, leaving the human delegation alone on the speaking platform. Morrison activated his communicator's privacy mode and gestured for his companions to gather close. "Well, that was about as subtle as a brick through a window," Hayes muttered quietly. "They're not even trying to hide what this really is," Carter agreed. "Subjugation with a diplomatic wrapper." Morrison nodded grimly. "The question is whether we're ready to back up a refusal with action. Once we say no, there's no going back to peaceful coexistence." "Captain, you know what the Admiral's orders were," Hayes reminded him. "Humanity doesn't kneel to anyone, especially not to bullies who threaten us when we won't submit voluntarily." "I know," Morrison replied. "But I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page before we potentially start a war." Carter looked around the empty chamber with its obvious displays of alien power and technology. "Are we really ready for this? They have thousands of ships, advanced weapons, and 3,000 years of military experience. They also have 3,000 years of fighting the same way against the same types of enemies," Morrison pointed out. "Sometimes experience becomes a weakness if it makes you predictable." He activated his secure communicator and began composing a message to Admiral Kate Brooks, who was waiting with the concealed human fleet just outside the system. The message was brief but clear: "Prepare for immediate action." "What are you going to tell them?" Carter asked. Morrison looked up at the alien architecture surrounding them, designed to make visitors feel small and powerless. "I'm going to tell them that humanity doesn't need their protection. Then we're going to show them why." The hour of recess would give Admiral Brooks time to position her forces exactly where Morrison needed them. When the Council reconvened, they would discover that their assumptions about human capabilities were dangerously incomplete. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" Hayes asked quietly. Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Colonel, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It's time to show these aliens what happens when they threaten human freedom." The hour of recess passed quickly as council members returned to their platforms with expressions of confident anticipation. They had given humanity time to consider the generous offer of protectorate status and most expected the small delegation to return with grateful acceptance of council protection. Chair Quindle settled his massive form onto his platform with scales displaying the light green shade that indicated satisfaction. Around him, the other council members took their positions with similar confidence. The chamber filled with alien observers eager to witness humanity's submission to galactic authority. "The recess is concluded," Quindle announced as the human delegation returned to the speaking platform. "Captain Morrison, has your government reached a decision regarding our offer of protection?" Morrison stood straight and looked directly at the council chair without showing any sign of nervousness or hesitation. Behind him, Carter and Hayes maintained their professional composure despite knowing what was about to unfold. "Chair Quindle, members of the Galactic Council, I have consulted with Earth Command regarding your generous offer," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "After careful consideration, humanity must respectfully decline protectorate status." The response was immediate and dramatic. Alien observers throughout the galleries began vocalizing their shock in dozens of different languages, creating a cacophony of surprise and disbelief. Several council members leaned forward on their platforms, clearly not expecting such a direct refusal. Ambassador Cretan's insectoid form clicked aggressively as he interrupted the noise. "Did you say decline?" "Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of our offer. This was not a negotiation but a necessity for your survival. I understood perfectly, Morrison replied calmly. Humanity appreciates the Council's concern but prefers to maintain our independence. We have successfully defended our colonies thus far and believe we can continue to do so. The chamber erupted in what Morrison could only describe as alien laughter. The sound was disturbing, a mixture of clicks, hisses, musical tones, and mechanical noises that somehow conveyed universal amusement at human stupidity. Your recent victories were achieved against disorganized pirates and scavengers. Cretan continued, his voice rising with anger. You faced perhaps a dozen ships with obsolete weapons and minimal training. Do you seriously believe such pathetic successes prepare you for real military threats? Quindle's scales shifted to a darker shade as he added his voice to the criticism. The raids you repelled represented less than 1% of the military force available to any council member. Your 200 ships would not survive contact with a single properly equipped battle group. Morrison nodded respectfully. You may be correct about our numerical disadvantage. However, humanity has learned that numbers alone do not determine the outcome of military conflicts. Then you are even more foolish than we initially believed. Vexthara's crystalline form pulsed with what appeared to be genuine concern. Captain Morrison, your species is committing suicide through arrogance. Accept our protection now before it becomes too late. The chamber fell silent as the council members waited for Morrison to reconsider his position. The human delegation stood alone on the speaking platform, surrounded by thousands of alien beings who considered their defiance both amusing and tragic. I understand your concerns, Morrison said finally. However, rather than accept protection we do not need, perhaps, we should demonstrate why humanity feels confident in our defensive capabilities. Before any council member could respond, Morrison activated his personal communicator and spoke a single word. Execute. The chamber's main display screen, which had been showing the peaceful star field around the station, suddenly filled with proximity alarms and sensor readings. The station's automated systems began announcing the detection of multiple unidentified vessels appearing throughout the system. What is the meaning of this? Quindle demanded, his scales shifting to the deep purple that indicated alarm. Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. This is what happens when you assume that what you can see represents everything that exists. The display screens around the chamber came alive with tactical information as the Council's sensors struggled to process what they were detecting. Ships were appearing from empty space, their forms materializing as advanced stealth systems, deactivated throughout the system. 30 human destroyers similar to the Defiant became visible around the station, their sleek hulls gleaming with the same dark gray coating that had allowed them to remain hidden. 12 larger vessels identified as heavy cruisers took positions at strategic points around the station's perimeter. Impossible, breathed Ambassador Zektar of the Silicon Collective, her mechanical form processing the sensor data with electronic precision. Our detection systems show no evidence of cloaked vessels. How did they bypass our sensors? By understanding how your sensors work and designing countermeasures specifically for them, Morrison explained calmly. Human stealth technology takes a different approach than what you might expect. The greatest shock came when the massive bulk of the UES Yorktown materialized directly above the station. The human dreadnought measured over 800 meters in length and bristled with weapon systems that the Council's computers were struggling to identify and classify. Attention Council Station, came Admiral Kate Brooks' voice over the communication system. This is Admiral Brooks of the United Earth Defense Forces. Our fleet is in position and ready to demonstrate human defensive capabilities upon request. The chamber descended into chaos as council members demanded explanations from their military advisors. How had an entire human fleet positioned itself around their most secure facility without detection? The station's defensive systems should have made such infiltration impossible. Your stealth technology is impressive, Quindle admitted, his massive form trembling with barely controlled rage. However, you are still outnumbered by our defensive forces. The station's own weapons could destroy your ships before they could react. Morrison's expression remained calm as he activated his communicator again. "Admiral, please provide a demonstration of our tactical capabilities." The response was immediate and precise. Every weapon system on the Council station suddenly went offline as human electronic warfare specialists demonstrated their ability to penetrate and disable alien defensive networks. The lights dimmed throughout the chamber as secondary systems struggled to compensate for the cyber attic. "Your weapons are now non-functional," Admiral Brooks announced over the communication system. "Our forces have assumed complete tactical control of this system. We could disable your life support, navigation, and communication systems just as easily." The implications were staggering. The humans had not only infiltrated the system with a substantial fleet but had also demonstrated the ability to neutralize the station's defenses without firing a single shot. The Council's supposedly impregnable fortress had been rendered helpless in moments. "This is an act of war," Cretan snarled, his insectoid form clicking with fury. "You have attacked a Council facility and threatened diplomatic representatives." "We have done nothing but demonstrate our capabilities," Morrison replied. "No weapons have been fired, no systems have been permanently damaged, and no lives have been threatened. We are simply showing you why humanity does not require your protection." Ambassador Vexthara's crystalline form flickered with confusion and fear. "How is this possible? Your technology is centuries behind our own. Your ships are smaller and less advanced than ours." "Advanced does not always mean effective," Morrison explained. "Human military doctrine focuses on achieving maximum results with minimum resources. We learned long ago that bigger is not always better." The chamber remained silent as the full scope of the human demonstration became clear. The species that the Council had dismissed as primitive and helpless had just proven capable of neutralizing their most secure facility. The aliens who had offered protection were now the ones who needed protecting. "What do you want?" Quendel asked finally, his voice subdued by the realization that the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Morrison looked around the chamber at the alien faces staring at him with newfound respect and fear. "We want the same thing we have always wanted, to be left alone to live our lives in peace." The silence in the Council chamber stretched for several minutes as alien minds struggled to process what had just occurred. The species they had dismissed as primitive and helpless had demonstrated tactical capabilities that surpassed anything. In the Council's 3,000 years of military experience, Chair Quindle was the first to break the silence, his massive scaled form still trembling with the aftershocks of complete surprise. "Captain Morrison, explain to us how your species achieves such advanced stealth capabilities with technology that our intelligence reports describe as centuries behind our own." Morrison glanced at his companions before responding. Carter gave him an encouraging nod while Hayes maintained his alert posture, ready for any sudden changes in the situation. The human captain had prepared for this moment during their journey to the station. "The answer lies in understanding the difference between advanced and effective," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Council, military doctrine appears to focus on overwhelming force and technological superiority. Human doctrine evolved differently." Ambassador Vexthara's crystalline form pulsed with urgent curiosity. "Elaborate on this difference. How can inferior technology produce superior results?" "Our stealth systems are not more advanced than yours," Morrison explained patiently. "They are simply designed to exploit specific weaknesses in your sensor technology. We studied your detection methods and created countermeasures tailored specifically to defeat them." The implications were staggering to the assembled aliens. Their sensor technology had been developed over millennia and tested against every known threat in the galaxy. The idea that a newcomer species could analyze and defeat it so easily challenged their fundamental assumptions about military superiority. "But how did you acquire knowledge of our sensor systems?" demanded Ambassador Cretan, his insectoid form clicking with agitation. "Such information is classified at the highest levels." Colonel Hayes spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. Every time your raiders attacked our colonies, they provided us with detailed intelligence about your technology. We analyzed their ships, their weapons, and their sensor arrays. Each attack taught us more about your capabilities and limitations. The admission sent ripples of shock through the council members. They had viewed the colonial raids as minor police actions against primitive targets. The possibility that these raids had actually been intelligence gathering opportunities for the humans had never occurred to them. Morrison continued the explanation. Human military philosophy emphasizes adaptability and resource efficiency. When facing a larger enemy, we do not try to match their strength directly. Instead, we identify their weaknesses and exploit them. You speak of weaknesses, Quindle rumbled, his scales shifting to deeper shades of purple. What weaknesses could you possibly perceive in technology that has dominated the galaxy for 3,000 years? Predictability, Morrison answered. Simply, your tactics follow established patterns that have been successful for millennia. Your ships are designed for direct confrontation between large fleets. Your strategies assume that superior numbers and technology will always prevail. Ambassador Zektar of the Silicon Collective processed this information through her mechanical systems before responding. Predictability is the result of proven effectiveness. Our methods have conquered hundreds of species and maintained galactic peace against species that fought using similar methods, Hayes interjected. When you encounter tactics that do not follow your established patterns, your advantages become limitations. Amy Carter stepped forward to add the diplomatic perspective. The colonial raids that brought us to your attention were not lucky victories against weak enemies. They were carefully planned demonstrations of asymmetric warfare principles. Morrison activated his personal display to show tactical recordings from the colonial defenses. The images revealed human defenders using tactics that seemed chaotic to alien observers, but followed carefully planned strategies designed to exploit enemy weaknesses. In the first raid on Colony 7, our defenders appeared to retreat in panic. Morrison narrated as the footage played. Your forces assumed they were routing and pursued according to standard doctrine. Instead, they were being drawn into prepared kill zones. The recording showed human civilians evacuating through predetermined routes while hidden defenders used improvised explosives to channel the alien attackers into areas where they're superior. Technology became disadvantages rather than assets. Your raiders expected our defenders to form defensive lines and fight conventionally, Morrison continued. Instead, we turned our entire cities into weapons. Every building became a potential ambush point, every street became a trap, and every civilian became an intelligence asset. Ambassador Vexthara's form flickered with what appeared to be recognition. The reports mentioned that your defenders seemed to know exactly where our forces would move next, because we understood your tactical doctrine better than you understood. Ours, Hayes confirmed. Your forces moved predictably because they had never encountered enemies who refused to fight according to established rules. The second recording showed the human defenders on Colony 12 using even more sophisticated tactics. They had learned from the first raid and developed countermeasures for alien responses to their initial strategies. By the second raid, we had identified patterns in your command structure and communication protocols, Morrison explained. We used these patterns against you by providing false information that caused your forces to make tactical mistakes. The footage revealed human defenders using captured alien communication equipment to send false orders to enemy units. The raiders ended up attacking each other while the humans remained safely hidden in positions their enemies never expected to be defended. The third raid demonstrated our ability to anticipate and counter your adaptations, Morrison continued as the final recording began. We had predicted how you would respond to our previous tactics and prepared appropriate countermeasures. This time the human defenders had used their knowledge of alien psychology to create situations that would cause enemy forces to react emotionally rather than tactically. The raiders became frustrated and angry, making mistakes that the humans exploited ruthlessly. You turned our own advantages against us, Cretan admitted reluctantly. Our superior technology became a weakness when you forced us to use it in ways it was not designed for. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. Your weapons are designed for ship-to-ship combat in open space, not for urban warfare against defenders who refuse to present clear targets. Your armor is effective against energy weapons but vulnerable to improvised kinetic devices. Engineer Pete Sullivan had joined the delegation from the Defiant and now added his technical expertise to the discussion. Every piece of your technology is optimized for specific scenarios. When we changed the scenarios, your technology became less effective than our improvised solutions. But how did you develop such sophisticated understanding of our capabilities so quickly? Vexthara asked, her crystalline form pulsing with frustrated curiosity. Human military tradition emphasizes studying potential enemies, Carter explained. We have been observing Council operations since we first achieved spaceflight 50 years ago. Every public military exercise, every patrol route, every standard procedure has been analyzed and cataloged. The revelation that humanity had been conducting intelligence operations for half a century without detection sent another wave of shock through the Council members. Their assumption that primitive species posed no intelligence threat had blinded them to systematic observation and analysis. Furthermore, Morrison added, human tactical thinking is fundamentally different from yours. We do not see larger numbers or better technology as insurmountable advantages. We see them as challenges that require creative solutions. Sullivan brought up technical displays showing human ship designs compared to alien vessels. Your ships are built for intimidation and direct confrontation. Our ships are built for stealth, speed, and precision strikes. Different objectives require different solutions. The human destroyer designs emphasized efficiency and adaptability rather than raw power. Their smaller size allowed for faster production, easier maintenance, and more flexible deployment. Most importantly, they were designed to work together as coordinated units rather than individual powerhouses. This fleet that appeared around your station represents only a fraction of human military capability, Morrison revealed quietly. It was positioned here to demonstrate our abilities, not to engage in actual combat. The implications were terrifying to the Council members. If this demonstration represented only a small portion of human capabilities, what could their full military force accomplish against Council fleets that had never faced such unconventional tactics? The weight of Morrison's final revelations settled over the Council chamber like a heavy blanket of silence. The alien representatives who had gathered to offer protection to a primitive species now found themselves confronting the reality that they might have just encountered the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Chair Quindle's massive form trembled as his scales cycled through several color changes, each representing different emotional states that human observers could only guess at. The Council leader who had ruled for over 2 centuries was clearly struggling to process information that challenged every assumption about galactic power structures. Members of the Council, Quindle announced slowly, we require an immediate recess to discuss these developments. The 12 Council members filed out of their platforms and disappeared through various exits, each heading to secure communication chambers where they could consult with their respective governments. The magnitude of what they had witnessed required careful consideration and possibly complete revision of their foreign policy approaches. Morrison watched them leave with satisfaction, knowing that humanity had achieved exactly what they had hoped for. The demonstration had been designed not to threaten or intimidate, but to establish respect and recognition of human capabilities. Captain, how long do you think they'll need to figure out their next move? Carter asked quietly as they waited, alone on the speaking platform. Probably several hours, Morrison replied. They need to contact their home governments and military advisors. This changes everything they thought they knew about the balance of power in this region of space. Colonel Hayes checked his communication device for updates from Admiral Brooks. The Admiral reports that Council military vessels are maintaining defensive positions but showing no signs of aggressive intent. They seem more concerned with analyzing our ships than threatening them. During the recess, Morrison used the time to establish communication with Earth Command and provide a full report on the proceedings. The response from Admiral Chun, the Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces, was brief but supportive. Continued diplomatic efforts but maintained tactical readiness. When the Council members returned to their platforms 3 hours later, their demeanor had changed dramatically. The condescending attitudes and casual dismissal of human capabilities had been replaced by careful respect and obvious wariness. Quindle resumed his position with scales, displaying neutral colors that suggested careful control of his emotional state. Captain Morrison, the Council has reached several important decisions regarding humanity's status in galactic affairs. Morrison straightened but maintained his relaxed posture, projecting confidence without arrogance. We are prepared to hear your decisions. First, Quindle began, the Council withdraws its offer of protectorate status. It is clear that humanity neither requires nor desires our protection. The admission drew murmurs from the alien observers in the galleries, who were finally beginning to understand that their assumptions about the human delegation had been completely wrong from the beginning. Ambassador Vextara's crystalline form pulsed with what appeared to be nervous energy as she continued the announcement. Second, the Galactic Council formally recognizes humanity as a sovereign spacefaring civilization with full rights to territorial integrity and self-governance. This was a significant concession. Full recognition typically required centuries of probationary membership and demonstration of technological and cultural sophistication. The Council was essentially fast-tracking humanity to equal status with species that had been members for millennia. Third, added Ambassador Zektar, her mechanical voice carrying careful precision, the Council offers humanity full membership with voting rights, territorial guarantees, and access to our trade networks. Morrison exchanged glances with his companions before responding. This was the outcome they had hoped for but had not dared to expect. Full membership would provide humanity with protection under galactic law while preserving their independence and autonomy. The Council's offer is generous and appreciated, Morrison replied diplomatically. However, I must consult with my government before accepting such significant responsibilities. Of course, Quindle agreed quickly. We understand that such decisions require proper consideration. Ambassador Cretan, who had been the most hostile to humanity during the initial proceedings, now spoke with grudging respect. Captain Morrison, the Voidstalkers would like to establish formal diplomatic relations with your species. We believe there could be mutual benefits in sharing tactical knowledge and military expertise. The offer was remarkable coming from a species known for their military pride and superiority complex. Cretan was essentially admitting that humanity had tactical innovations that even the galaxy's premier warriors could learn from. Morrison activated his secure communicator and established contact with Admiral Brooks aboard the Yorktown. After a brief consultation, he returned his attention to the Council members. Admiral Brooks has confirmed that Earth Command authorizes acceptance of Council membership under specific conditions, Morrison announced. Humanity will join the Council as an equal partner, not as a subordinate or protectorate. The distinction was important to both sides. The Council needed to save face by presenting humanity's membership as voluntary cooperation rather than submission to superior force. Humanity needed to establish that they would not be dominated or controlled by alien interests. We accept those conditions, Quindle agreed readily. Humanity will be granted the same rights and responsibilities as any other Council member. Carter stepped forward to handle the diplomatic details. Earth will establish permanent diplomatic missions on the Council Station and major member worlds. We look forward to productive relationships with all Council species. As the formal proceedings concluded, Morrison noticed significant changes in how the alien representatives interacted with the human delegation. The casual dismissal and condescending attitudes had been replaced by careful courtesy and genuine interest in human perspectives. Captain Morrison, Vexthara approached as the chamber began to empty. The crystalline hegemony would be honored to host a cultural exchange program with your species. We believe we could learn much from human innovation and adaptability. Similar offers came from several other council members, each seeking to establish positive relations with this unexpected new power. The species that had been ignored for 50 years was suddenly the most sought-after diplomatic partner in the galaxy. Admiral Brooks' voice came through Morrison's communicator as the human delegation prepared to depart. Captain, we're receiving communication requests from at least 8 different council member species. Everyone wants to establish trade agreements and military cooperation pacts. Morrison smiled as he looked around the chamber that had been designed to intimidate and diminish visitors. Admiral, please inform them that humanity is open to discussions, but will evaluate each proposal carefully. We're not desperate for acceptance anymore. As the human fleet prepared to depart the council station, Morrison reflected on how completely the situation had reversed in just a few hours. They had arrived as supplicants seeking recognition and were leaving as equals commanding respect from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Sir, what happens now? Hayes asked as they walked toward their shuttle. Now we go home and figure out how to manage being important, Morrison replied. Earth is about to become a major player in galactic politics, whether we wanted to or not. The shuttle bay doors closed behind them as the human delegation departed, leaving behind a council that would never again make the mistake of underestimating a species based on size, technology, or apparent weakness. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or submission, but through the simple demonstration that intelligence and determination could overcome any advantage. Admiral Brooks transmitted a final message to the council station as the human fleet activated their stealth systems and began to disappear from sensors once again. This concludes our demonstration. We look forward to productive relationships with all council members. The last thing the alien observers saw was empty space where moments before a formidable human fleet had controlled their most secure system. The message was clear: humanity could appear anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing the council could do to stop them. Respect, Morrison knew, was always more valuable than fear, and humanity had just earned both in equal measure.